going on? It's your boy Tahir Johnson. I'm back with another week of the Cannabis Diversity Report. And I got my homegirl from Jersey in the building. Jess, what's up?
How's it going? Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. It's so good to see you. Always good to have one of my fellow New Jerseyans in the house. And you're one of my favorite folks, so it's good to catch up. Definitely been a while since COVID, no cannabis events and everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but for everybody listening, Jessica Gonzalez is a cannabis and IP attorney. She's also the General Counsel for Minorities for Medical Marijuana. So Jess, just tell us a little bit about you, what you do, how you got in the cannabis industry.
Yeah, sure. So hello, everybody. So my name is Jess Gonzalez. I'm a cannabis and intellectual property attorney at a firm in New Jersey called Bressler Amery Ross. In addition to that, I'm outside General Counsel for the national organization, Minorities for Medical Marijuana. I also sit on the state and federal policy committee for the Minority Cannabis Business Association. I'm also part of a director of a newly formed group called the Cannabis Advisory Group. And in addition to that, I'm part of the coalition for NJCAN 2020, which is helping to push for equitable legalization in New Jersey since we are voting on legalization this upcoming November. So I wear a lot of hats in the space, but a lot of it centers really around social equity, social justice. And the way actually that I got involved in cannabis was actually through intellectual property. Prior to my cannabis days, I was an IP attorney for large music companies and music instrument companies. And so practicing what I preach when I tell folks just use the skills that you have and pivot into the cannabis space, that's exactly what I did. And so I actually was going to a lot of different cannabis events and I was like, wow, that's a really dope logo, or that's a really cool name. And I would ask a lot of these vendors, how are you protecting your name? And they would just tell me like, well, I own the LLC, or, I just created it, so it's mine. And I started to see that there was a huge disconnect between the cannabis community and the intellectual property world, right? And for me, intellectual property is so important because it's so intangible. And that's why it's so much more, it needs to be protected that much more, but it's also that much more useful in the cannabis space where your plant touching goods can't cross state lines, but your intellectual property can. And so it's actually how I got my start into it. And I started to take on some cannabis brands from around the country. And then my work expanded from there into more compliance as well as some corporate business. And of course, the more that I looked into cannabis and the more that I researched the history behind it, the more appalled I was as to its legalities and how it became a Schedule I drug. And when I realized that it had nothing to do with scientific evidence, that's when I realized that perhaps I really do need to be a voice for a lot of those folks who are voiceless. So I'm a Latina immigrant. I was born in Ecuador. And so I know that for a lot of immigrants or for a lot of Latinos, they do not have the privilege to advocate for something that is still federally illegal. So I consider it a tremendous privilege to be able to do the work that I do because I'm protected and I have a lot of privileges. One is that I'm a US citizen and I'm an attorney and I know how to protect myself. But a lot of folks didn't have that. So I started to really advocate for those communities because I started to see as an attorney in this space how expensive it was to actually enter into the space. So I wanted to take it upon myself to be the lawyer for communities of color who needed legal help and legal protection. And that's really how I got my start.
Right, that's super dope. And you're always working and staying busy, like you said. And it's so important that you not only focus on like the intellectual property, but also the advocacy piece, right? Like making sure that people of color really understand what they have, their rights, like understanding legalization, that social equity is on the forefront. So it's always dope to see you kind of leading that conversation. And to kind of dig into intellectual property a little bit more, I know like in music, the things like your lyrics or like things like that are obvious, or like you said, your logos or like the company name or something that's intellectual property. But I know that it's also much wider than that and more, kind of more expansive than that. What are some of the other things that cannabis business owners kind of should protect in terms of their intellectual property?
Yeah, so the first thing that they really should protect is their brand name. And so folks tend to create a brand name. They invest a lot of money, time, and resources in building up that brand without realizing that without the proper protections, they could easily lose the rights to use that brand name. And when you lose that, you lose your goodwill, you lose your reputation, and you lose, on social media, a lot of your followers if you have to do a brand name change. So the first thing that I always tell folks to do is, if you come up with a name, for your brand, whether it be for your dispensary, whether it be for lifestyle products, whether it be for your education, the first thing that you have to do is look to make sure that that name is, one, it's available, and two, that you're not infringing on somebody else's name. And so in cannabis, there is a tendency to go towards names, with canna, weed, harvest, wellness, bloom. And there's so much of that. And there's so much of that more coming as the market continues to get a little bit more saturated. So it's important to create a unique name, a distinct name, something that's going to set you apart from a lot of your competitors, right? And that's where you kind of fall into the realm of trademark law. And in cannabis, it's really, really unique because you actually can't get trademark protection for your plant touching goods or services. And the reason for that is because trademark is based on federal laws. So the United States Patent and Trademark Office has to adhere to federal agencies. They have to adhere to the Controlled Substance Act. They have to adhere to all the farm bills. They have to adhere to what the FDA says. And so with these illegalities, there's this disconnect, right? Of, well, now you have all of these states who, 33 states who have legalized for medical with all these different brands popping up, but they actually can't acquire any national federal protection for their brand. And that becomes also a public health issue, because imagine you're in California and you get a brand of edibles, right, in California, and then you go to Massachusetts and you see a similar brand. You may assume that it's the same type of cannabis, that it's the potency is the same, that it's going to have the same effect, but it's not. Right. And it's kind of like right now, you can go to any sneaker shop in the country, and if you have been buying the same pair of Nike shoes, you can buy the same pair of Nike shoes in California and in Massachusetts, and you're going to get the same shoe. That's the issue that we have in the cannabis space right now. And so there are mechanisms to protect your intellectual property, even if it's not your plant touching goods or services. So what I tell companies to do and how I advise them is take inventory of your intellectual property. Let's look at your core service or good that you're offering, and then let's look at what are other ancillary goods or services that you are offering. And let's try to protect each and every single one of those. You sell clothing, you sell merchandise, you have a website, you're doing consulting on the side. All of those can be protected. And the whole purpose is, let's create a protective halo around what you can't protect with what we can protect. And in the cannabis space, ownership is so, so important. And that's why, when folks try to make the connection between intellectual property, social equity, and ownership, it wasn't particularly clear, but it was very clear to me because I have seen a lot of companies who have had to start over. And that's what I try to prevent with my clients is, let's make sure that you have a name that you can protect so you can comfortably build upon that foundation. Because what most people don't know is, you look at the biggest companies in the world, Apple, Google, IBM, their top 3 most valuable assets, intellectual property is always one of them. Their trademark is always in the top 3 most valuable assets, right? Coca-Cola's brand name trademark is worth more than the actual product itself.
Right, just that person, Coca-Cola, right? That's
exactly. You can place an Apple logo on somewhere, and automatically that raises the value of it. That's how important your intellectual property is. So in cannabis, you can't say, okay, I have this brand name of cannabis and it's really great, and I'm just going to, ship it across state lines. You can't do that, right? And so but your intellectual property can, because you can license it out. So while these state barriers really restrict your goods, your intellectual property can travel across the country and even across the world. So why not protect something so valuable like that?
Right. And, speaking about, different states and things crossing state lines, right now we have 5 states with legalization potentially on the ballot coming up November, our home state of New Jersey being one of them. Could you talk a little bit more about the New Jersey campaign for legalization? What's going on with that? What are some of the important things people need to know?
Yeah, sure. So New Jersey, we're voting on it this November 3rd. It's on the back of the ballot. And so part of our campaign, we rolled out, it's turn the page. And, it's a double entendre. It's turn the page both on your ballot, but also New Jersey, we also have to turn a page because New Jersey consistently ranks in the top 3 states with the highest cannabis arrests. And that has been going on for years, and it typically competes with New York and Texas. And so just given its very active participation in the criminalization of cannabis, it's really, really important that we legalize cannabis and not just legalize it, but that we legalize it in an equitable manner. So the ACLU issued a report, and it revealed that New Jersey spends $143 million a year prosecuting cannabis arrests, the majority of which are Black or Latinos. And that's an extremely, extremely high number. And that's an extremely unfortunate amount of people who are getting incarcerated. And right now we're looking at 96 people a day. So by the time that we have finished even our conversation, we'll have a handful of people that were being arrested for cannabis. And we know the implications of that. It's generational, right? Your access to education, your access to housing, your access to student loans. It can really create a huge barrier to entry for the rest of your life for a plant whose criminality is rooted in discriminatory intent. And so right now, what we're doing in New Jersey is the coalition is made up of the ACLU, the NAACP, the Latino Action Network, Progressive Democrats of New Jersey, lawyers, doctors, various advocates, veterans, all really pushing forward for this, because what we're going to keep seeing is more arrests. We're going to keep seeing high expenditures and just people's lives just really getting disrupted for a very medicinal plant. And the issue right now that I really want to get across is if we do not legalize now, we're going to have to wait at the very least another 3 or 4 years. So this is really our shot to help catalyze the Northeast, because New York will follow, Connecticut will follow, Pennsylvania will follow. Why? Because they are going to have to. They are not going to want their tax dollars and their residents coming over to New Jersey, getting their cannabis, bringing it back to their state lines, and New Jersey's benefiting from it in terms of tax revenue. So they will follow. We are just a domino that needs to fall for that to happen.
Right. Yeah. New Jersey absolutely is the domino, I think, that unlocks everything on the East Coast. And I think something you said is so important about just how legalization, just even outside of the multi-billion-dollar industry and all the money that cannabis brings, one of the things that's most important to me is the fact that our people are getting arrested for this, right? Getting all types of charges. Personally, even growing up myself in Trenton, I've been pulled over like over 75 times in my life. So thankfully, I'm lucky to still be able to be in the positions that I'm in. So like when you look at legalization, how important is it that things like expungement or, are included in that, people being arrested from prison? Could you talk about that a little bit, and then maybe even go into a little bit more, like, what do you think the full definition of like social equity is, and how important is it that like kind of goes along with legalization?
Yeah, sure. So that's going to be a really central part of a campaign. So New Jersey actually did pass an expungement bill that's still being, kind of worked out. But with legalization, really, that's going to stop a lot of the arrests that we're currently seeing, because decriminalization is really not enough, right? And some folks who have been advocating for decrim, all we have to do is point them to New York, where New York arrests 17,000 people in 2017, despite the fact that it was decriminalized in the 1970s. So that does not stop any sort of arrest. Legalization is really the only avenue that we have to stop a lot of those police interactions. And that's what legalization will bring. And in terms of really, social equity, the way that I look at social equity in this space is the state being responsible for providing the resources to the communities that were most harmed by the criminalization of cannabis to be able to apply or have some skin in the game if they want to, right? Not everybody's going to want to be a dispensary owner or an operator, but the opportunity does need to be there, but the resources need to be there. The infrastructure needs to be there. And so when we've seen the implementation in a lot of states, such as, like Illinois, right, who was supposed to be the poster child for a social equity program, the infrastructure just wasn't really set up there. And so the type of infrastructure that I look at is the state needs to start preparing education, state-sanctioned education for its folks on how to get involved. technical assistance, access to lawyers, access to accountants. There are some states where they've worked with their lawyer bar associations to provide these sort of pro bono services, right? I believe California is doing that right now. There also is going to need to be some sort of loan, some sort of grants that are also provided to folks that could be derived from the tax revenue from adult use, right? And so I know that there are some folks who want social equity day one. But I think really, it's always going to be, where's the money going to come from to put these programs together? And that's what a lot of tax revenue is going to be able to funnel into. So in New Jersey, we have some sort of social equity provisions in our medical law, but I think we are going to have the opportunity to expand upon them because we don't actually have a formal social equity program that I believe that we should have, where it's a track for social equity applicants with requirements of what a social equity applicant is, right? And that differs from state to state, but most of the time it has to deal with, the city in which you live in, whether, it's called, considered an impact zone. It depends on also on your salary, if you've been incarcerated, your parent, a child. All of that really encompasses, because we also have to steer clear of constitutional issues. And so in states, that we saw where there were a lot of social equity programs based on race, they've always been challenged in courts, right? It's the same folks who are against affirmative action are going to be the same folks who are really against these sort of set-asides or that they've been calling them. So we have to really tread carefully in how we create this program, but without a defined social equity program that has a very specific track and very specific resources allocated to it, I don't believe we really will achieve true social equity, because you can't just give somebody a license and guarantee them success. That's just not how it works, right? We've seen that all across the industry, that a license doesn't mean you'll be successful. There needs to be some sort of guidance. There needs to be mentorship. There needs to be access to professional services, because that's what's really expensive, right? The application fees and professional services. And so that's something that I've been trying to work with, and in talking with the ACLU of New Jersey, who's helping to prepare some legislation so that we can get a lot of these programs in. So that's what we've been working for.
Right. And like you said, education, access, building that community is so important. And I know, like you said, you're the outside General Counsel of M4MM, and that's really a big part of what your mission is. For folks that really don't know about M4MM, could you share a little bit more about what the organization does, and even some of the things you guys have done there in New Jersey, like the boot camps?
Yeah, sure. So Minorities for Medical Marijuana is a national nonprofit. I believe they're in over 25 states at this point. And what they provide is they provide a ton of education for its members, resources in the ways of like job fairs as well, resume reviews. They also provide these boot camps that you were talking about that they had, I believe, in Missouri, New Jersey, and Illinois. And these boot camps were, the way that they were designed, it was 2 days where, the price for, it usually was around $400 per company. So if you had 5 people in a company, you could all go for $400 for 2 days. And you received a ton of instructional materials. You received almost 16 hours of instruction from vetted professionals and operators and applicants as well, in order to provide them with a sort of primer of, this is what you're going to need to know. Obviously, you can't teach people in 2 days everything they need to know, right? Me and you, we're probably still learning something new every single day. But when I participated in the New Jersey one, I talked about contracts and intellectual property. And I knew that, just an hour and a half of instruction wasn't going to be enough. But my goal was, I need you to be familiar with these terms. I need you to understand what an NDA means and how there's 2 types. I need you to understand what an operating agreement is and what it entails. Not so much for you to understand, the full in-depth of it, but just to be familiar with those terms so that you can protect yourself and ensure that when you are entering into business transactions or when you are signing a contract, that you have some awareness of what it is that didn't come from Google. And so that's really what we wanted to get across. And then folks, what ended up happening was they found each other within these boot camps. Some folks, they combined forces to apply. And so it became for the folks who were really serious about doing this and who just wanted that education, but it also provided them with a network. And I think that's one of the best parts about M4MM is that because it has such a huge national footprint, it provides a very large network, especially for minorities who are looking to get involved, who may not know how or who may not know who to talk to. So that's what the organization really, provides. And I believe, last year was the third year in a row that it won Organization of the Year at the Cannabis Business Awards, which was very cool.
Mm-hmm. Heck yeah, and it's so dope what you guys are doing, especially because I think what people don't understand is there are many barriers to success in the cannabis industry. And especially in our communities, access to capital, even access to the expertise like you, the legal expertise that you have really doesn't exist in our community. I was actually looking up some statistics as I was preparing to talk to you today, and I read that less than Latinas make up less than 2% of the population of all attorneys, in this entire country. And then also Blacks and Latinos make up less than 10% of ownership in the cannabis industry combined. So,
Yep.
For you to be in this position and kind of be a successful attorney and a successful woman in the cannabis industry, what does that mean to you? And, tell me a little bit about that experience kind of, in both.
Yeah, sure. So the number is abysmal. The fact that it's, Latina attorneys are 1.7%. That number actually hasn't changed in 10 years. And despite the fact that we have seen more Latinas growing. But I think, I'm navigating between two very white male dominated worlds. And in the beginning, I'm not going to sugarcoat it for anybody. It was very difficult to one, really be taken seriously in terms of my profession and who I was, but also to try to, kind of break through those barriers as a woman who was trying to really kind of, make a name for myself, really get out there, really kind of advocate for a lot of people who wouldn't really be able to. And so it was, it took a lot of consistency, really. And I don't think I've ever been as consistent with something as I have with my cannabis career ever in my life. And so consistency works. And I knew that I was going to have to play this game differently. I knew that I don't walk into the room with the presumption of competence, right? That is a white man's luxury that I knew that I didn't have. And so when I looked at cannabis and when I even looked at my legal career, I knew that I wanted to make a difference. And I knew that I really wanted to help out with something that I truly believed in. So I feel very grateful for my position because at 29 years old, I'm able to actually practice and do what I really love to do for a plant that I truly, truly believe in. And that's very rare for a young attorney to be able to find something and actually be able to do well in it, or even have the opportunity to do it. Because typically when you first become an attorney, kind of just put you in a little, kind of placeholder and they say, that's where you're going to be. I had to break out of that. And actually what I had to do in playing the game differently was I had to quit the corporate law firm kind of world and start my own law firm. And the reason that I did that is because there were no jobs out there that I saw myself actually working in. I wanted to be in cannabis, but nobody was hiring for cannabis attorneys. And I knew that if I were to, stay at the firm or go to another firm at that time, I wouldn't actually be able to fully immerse myself in the best way possible. So I figured I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to do this extremely risky move. I'm going to start my own law firm with a partner, focus solely on cannabis, hemp, and CBD. I'm going to make sure that I work with the communities that I really want to help, which are communities of color and women. And I'm just going to see how it goes. And I learned so much in my 1 year of having my own law firm because it was almost, sink or swim. I had to learn new things. I had to put myself out there. I was my own marketing person, my own IT person, my own billing person. But I learned the different facets of, running a company, running a business, and then also being a lawyer as well, and how to talk to clients and how to help them. And I saw a lot of dreams die because of the lack of capital that folks had to enter into the space. And so when I started my own law firm, I made sure that I'd have flexible payment plans, that we would have flat fee rates. And I also provided discounts to organizations that were fighting for social equity in the space. I wanted to do whatever I could possible to make sure that folks could have accessible legal services. But it took me to do that in order for folks to take me seriously. And so when I tell people you may have to move different, I really mean that, because it really helped kind of, folks to take me a little bit more seriously, realizing that this was something I really wanted to do. But I kept showing up in every possible way when I was tired, when I was unmotivated, when I was absolutely frightened to get on a stage, or absolutely terrified to walk into a room where I didn't know anybody. I really had to keep motivating myself, and it's that kind of mental stamina that eventually takes its toll, right? And so I, being a young Latina attorney, I just had to move differently and do things very differently. So what I did was I capitalized on social media, because I realized a lot of lawyers weren't doing so. And I made sure that I invested a lot in the community. I made sure that I provided a lot of free education to various people. I made sure that I partnered up with various organizations to do what I had to do. I made sure to support organizations, donate to organizations, because I wanted, folks to just also not see me as, a money hungry attorney, right? But somebody who's also fighting for a cause. And you don't really see that many attorneys doing that. So I took a look at all the other attorneys and said, how can I differentiate myself from them in order so that I can, be taken more seriously by folks and gain more visibility so that I can fully represent my community.
Right. And it's so dope to see all the success that you've achieved, because of me watching it from afar, I feel like it was like the same time that I kind of set out and I did the same thing, took that risk, quitting my job to try to make it. And that's really what we have to do to try to sometimes be successful. One thing that I want to know is, being an attorney in cannabis really is like a specialized thing. So as you were trying to get education, like on the law specifically, because like you said, back then when you were starting, there really weren't, a couple of years ago, there weren't as many specialized cannabis law firms. So if somebody's an attorney now and they want to try to transition to cannabis, where are some places they can go to learn, or like resources that they can get access to?
Yeah, sure. So right now, I get this question all the time. So my LinkedIn messages are blown up by attorneys all over the country. I think I've spoken to over 40 at this point, from various levels of experience, to law students just graduating, to folks who've been practicing for 30 years asking me, how did you do it? How did you break into this, right? So what I tell folks is, there's no such thing as cannabis law per se, right? It's more, how does cannabis touch every other area of law? How does it fit in within other areas of law? Because inevitably it's going to touch almost every single area. But right now I'm practicing without precedent, right? No, everything is still very unclear. Everything is still in the gray. But once again, I tell folks is, don't try to reinvent the wheel, right? If you were an employment attorney, start educating yourself on really, employment type issues in cannabis. Start writing about them, start talking about them, start suggesting solutions to it. Because that's what I did with intellectual property. Because what I kept seeing were lawyers on stage telling folks, oh, you have weed in the name, you can't get that protected. Or, oh, that you have this product or service, no, I'm sorry, if it has anything to do with cannabis, you can't actually get that trademarked. And I was like, there's something wrong with that. So I took it upon myself. I looked through hundreds of applications on the United States Patent and Trademark Office, which ones passed, which ones did not. And I created almost like a roadmap for myself of, okay, so these were able to achieve registration this way. These are the types of obstacles they faced. Now let me try to kind of come up with, a strategy for my clients to make sure, that this happens or that this doesn't happen. But it took a lot of self-education. So one thing I did in the beginning was I bought a lot of different cannabis books. And then I also took the fundamentals of cannabis on Greenleaf as well. So just to kind of get a little bit more knowledge, because you need to be able to talk the language, right? And so do I really need to, in my legal world, do I need to know the different parts of the plant? Like maybe not, but at some point I might. And so I took that upon myself as well. So I think the best advice that I can tell people is find the area of law that you like, because you may not like the area of law that you're practicing in now, and start really diving into the research, really start looking at, cases that could have some precedent, start looking at other cases that are coming down and seeing, comments on them, write a blog about them. But I think sometimes, as lawyers, we're taught really to not be creative, right? We're taught to kind of fit within this mold, to, abide by precedent. But that's why I love cannabis so much, because this book hasn't been written just yet. It's being written right now. And so I can actually be a little bit more creative and think about different ways of doing things, because we're all in the same boat trying to figure it out, as opposed to other established areas of law where there's already an enormous amount of precedent. So just once again, just pivot the skills, that you have now, whether you're a litigator, there's going to be a ton of cannabis legal litigation. You're an employment attorney, there's going to be a ton of that. Really, whatever type of lawyer you are, cannabis is going to be a very big part of that. So if you can start educating yourself now, and you can start kind of becoming a bit of a leader in that space and getting people to trust you on the type of information you're providing, that's a really good way to start, right? And so that's what I did. And I just made sure that people understood that, I was an IP attorney, this is what I was going to do. And then I started really breaking it down for folks, because what I see as such a huge barrier is just the lack of education, right? And so that's what I've been really trying to provide through my speaking engagements and talking. And a mentor once told me, she said, Mija, nobody's going to find you sitting under a rock. She was like, so you got to get yourself out there. So to attorneys who want to do this isn't something that you can hide behind and say, oh, I kind of want to do this. It's, yes, you may have to come out of the green closet per se to your, to your colleagues and to your family. But if it's something that you want to do, you got to really be at the forefront of it, because you can't just be in this, but also not be an advocate as well, right? That one does not work without the other. So
I agree. And that's some of the same stuff I always tell people. Like, you have to be about the advocacy. You gotta put it out there. You gotta have cannabis on your LinkedIn, right? If you want to do this, right? You gotta really go at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still remember the first Instagram post that I posted about cannabis. And I remember being so nervous about it. And I was just like, should I do this? Should I do this? I was like, this goes out to, and I think I didn't even have that many followers at that time, but it was very nerve-wracking for me. So I understand that for other folks whose colleagues may not know about, your affinity for cannabis, or your family might not know, that it could be a little bit terrifying. But then that's an opportunity for you to educate other people on it.
Mm-hmm. And, one other thing I did want to ask you about, because you're in New Jersey, I know that we have the potential adult use getting ready to pass, but there also they were looking at expanding New Jersey's medical program. Where is that, right? Where's New Jersey at with that right now?
So that expansion is still on hold, so the Department of Health was sued by a couple of applicants who were disqualified based on technical errors. So the last I heard, that's still, that hold is really still in effect. I'm not sure if legalization, once it passes, if that's going to start to, kind of get a move on that, but I anticipate that it will, because if the will of the people, has spoken and people want legalization in New Jersey, I think that's also going to motivate, the Department of Health to start moving a little quicker on this, or figure out, what they can do. I'm not sure how they're going to go about that, but if this lawsuit doesn't get settled, there's no way we're going to see an expansion of the medical, and there's no way we're going to see, any sort of start of the adult use market just yet, until that holdup, is done. And I understand it from both sides, right? I understand it from the sides of the litigants who want a really fair shot at having their application prepared, because it's really expensive to get an application together. And then I understand it from the other folks who, just want their application reviewed as well, and the patients who also just want this sort of expansion. So I can definitely see it from all angles, but I don't think until that lawsuit is settled, we're not really going to see much movement.
Right. And I know you're super busy there, working on the campaign, doing a bunch of different things. So I don't want to hold you too long, but just before I let you go, I know you already gave so much great advice for attorneys that want to try to get in the industry, and some important things for IP. We have our social equity scholarship program here at NCIA. So we have about 100 operators and applicants from all over the country that are a part of our program. What are some of the other most important legal things? Like if somebody had a checklist and they're starting a cannabis business, what are some of the things they need to make sure that they're, kind of doing and looking at from a legal perspective?
Sure. So the first thing is to get yourself competent counsel. And I highly recommend getting a lawyer who has experience in the cannabis realm as well, because I've, have a lot of things that come across my desk from previous law firms and, lawyers who are not experienced, so who don't understand that there are a couple of nuances when it comes to advising various cannabis companies. But really, you're going to want to make sure that you have an entity, right? Whether it's an LLC or a corporation, you're going to want to make sure that you have one of those so you protect your personal assets, right? You don't want any sort of lawsuit, and you don't want your home and your car implicated in any of that. So it's important to separate, your own personal assets from your business as well. So you also have this halo of protection around you as well. And that's what a corporate entity, actually does. So I always, when we go through a checklist, as you just said, it's always, you have your corporate entity, all good, and then your paperwork, with your partners as well. And that brings me to the point of doing your due diligence on your partners. Ensure that they are who they say that they are, that they're going to do what they say that they're going to do. This cannabis community is so small that it's very easy to check up, on who's doing what and who's not, right? And I think the more that you have experience in the cannabis space, the more that you can vet out a lot of the BS, and a lot of the folks who are really just trying to make a quick buck. But I tell people all the time that you have to make sure that who you're working with is actually who they say that they are. So make sure you do your due diligence on them. And then once you have, make sure that your paperwork is in place, whether you have an LLC and you need an operating agreement, or you have a corporation, you need a shareholders agreement. These agreements are really what's going to bind every member to the company. So you need to ensure that those documents are well prepared and well contemplated for possible scenarios down the road, right? Because a lot of people in this space, they get in business with their family or friends, and everything starts out really great in the beginning. But as we know, that doesn't always tend to be the case later on. But if you have a document where, it says, these are the rules, this is how we're doing things, that can really help preserve your relationships, and it can really help preserve the integrity of your company, right? So there's no confusion about anything. Because if there weren't any disputes, lawyers would be out of jobs. So it happens all the time. And then, of course, your intellectual property, getting that set up as well is extremely important. And then you get along with your bank accounts and your insurance and things like that. But you really just need to make sure that your foundation is set. And that really falls to your corporate entity and your intellectual property. That's what sets the foundation for how your company is actually going to grow. Because if your LLC is not set up correctly, neither is your paperwork, or your intellectual property is not, you're starting off on very shaky grounds. And those are the two things that people mess up from the beginning because they assume they can do it themselves. And in this space, I highly recommend that if you are a company and you have a big vision for your company and you're trying to take this, national and global, you've got to start acting like those national and global companies and making sure that you cross all your T's, that you dot all your I's, and that everything is done well from the beginning, because then you can build. If you can't build, then it's just going to fall apart. You're going to lose a lot of money, time, and space, and you're just going to get discouraged. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen so many times for things that could have been avoided. So it's much more cost effective for you to get proper counsel from the beginning than for us to have to go back and correct something that wasn't done properly. But also vet your attorneys as well. Ask about them, ask about referrals, see what their work are, see who they're involved with as well. Everything in the cannabis space is a huge vetting process because there's so much eagerness to get involved. So you have to be that much more careful as well, and make sure that, you are building with folks who do have the same values and vision, as you had, right? Like I had my own business and it really didn't work out. And so I also learned a lot of these, issues that came across just through my own personal experience. And that's what I try to get across to my clients is let's learn from the mistakes of other people so you don't have to, actually go about them, and we can actually focus on not correcting, but actually building.
Right. Absolutely. But Jess, man, I hope y'all are really paying attention because y'all just got so much great advice from an amazing attorney, one of the dopest, smartest people in the cannabis industry. Jess, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all of this with the guests. And shout out to everybody that's been listening, man. I see we got Brother Broderick down at ATL. I see my man Joe Mack on the Facebook page commenting. It's definitely good to see y'all, and we'll see y'all next week back with the next episode of the Cannabis Diversity Report.
Awesome.